great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome from all your respective time zones, and especially for the Europeans, thank you very much for putting in the time and effort and braving sitting up late at night to attend this session. Welcome to this workshop for the RDA Fair Data Maturity Model Working Group. Today we'd like to work through a number of the, oh, thank you, Christophe. Christophe will be advancing the slides. Today we will be, yes, Françoise, for you it's very, very, very early morning, and for me it is nice and comfortably in the morning, and for those in the US it's evening, I think, late evening. So it's an interesting mix of times for everybody. So first of all, I'll kick off with a welcome and introduction to the meeting, a little bit of history to the working group. This is mainly for people that have not been to work sessions of our working group before. So bear with me if you have been to sessions before, you may have heard some of this before. Then we'll focus on a survey we've conducted, bridging the gap between funders and communities. We will have two presentations today on FAIR in different regional contexts and what is happening there. And then we would like to have some discussion around the maintenance phase and what that means in practice and what the working group will be doing ongoing. And then we would like to close. So Christophe, yep, thank you very much. So in the chat window is sort of a quick round of introductions. Could you please type your name, your affiliation, and what your role is in this space? So we have a bit of an idea who's attending. So for one, in this meeting, there are my co-chairs, Shelley Stahl and Edith Herzog. So great that you could both make it from your time zones. And a big thank you also to Max Deckers and Christophe from both based in Europe. And they are the editorial team which are helping us out in this working group. And they've done a great job, and very appreciative for all the work they're doing. And especially as they're coming in at this rather uncomfortable time zone. So yes, and other people attending are Wille ten Hoon, Chris Seal, who will be speaking later, Peter McQuilton from Fair Sharing, Catherine Patterson from LA, Lawrence L. Khoury from CNRS, Michael Smolinski, David Carr, Andrew McKenna Foster from Figshare, Sophie Aubin-Dirier, and Pedro Luis Pizzigatti Correa, I hope I got that right, from University of Sao Paulo, who will also be speaking later. So thank you all, and please continue to add if you've not already added your names to that list. So just a bit of context around the Fair Data Maturity Model Working Group. The Fair Data Principles were sort of conceived back in 2014 as a set of high-level principles around data sharing and reuse. But one of the things that developed over time was a realization that the principles are high-level principles. And that means that they are not extremely strict and detailed, but rather provide an overview. And as a result of that, you get, we saw quite a lot of ambiguity in translating those fair data principles or fair principles in practice, and quite a wide range of interpretations of fairness. So to address, and resulting from that, you saw a range of different fair assessment frameworks being developed around the globe with different metrics and no possibility to actually compare those results. So we said as a working group, it actually would be worthwhile bringing together all these stakeholders around the globe to sort of build on those existing approaches and expertise to see if we could come up with a set of core assessment criteria for fairness, and resulting in a fair data maturity model. So that was the aim of the working group. Next slide, please. So just to be clear, what the working group does not aim to do is develop yet another evaluation method, or does not aim to define how the core criteria need to be evaluated. That is up to implementations of this fair data maturity model. And one of the things we definitely ran into in this process is we did not aim to revise or redesign the fair data principles. The fair principles, we kept them as a set. The next slide, please. So the way this was approached back in 2019, we established the working group. One of the first exercises we did was a landscaping exercise, bringing together all those publicly available fair assessment tools and just comparing those. So there is actually a document out there if you're interested to see which tools are out there or were out there at that time. And then based on that, we drafted a set of indicators, and we started to collect community input and agreement around what would be the agreed set of indicators. And that resulted in the birth of the Fair Data Maturity Model, which is now available on Zenodo. Next slide, please. So in this year, 2020, we started to test that initial set of indicators against data sets and methodologies to see if it would work. And we published the actual Fair Data Maturity Model as an RDA recommendation. The working group has transitioned now into maintenance mode, and we are investigating what does maintenance and governance aspects around the Fair Data Maturity Model mean. We're also looking at identifying topics for the next version of the Fair Data Maturity Model. So one of the steps we're currently taking is a survey to bridge the gap between funders and communities, and we'll be speaking about that later. And there is a retrospective publication in the Data Science Journal on the outcomes of the Fair Data Maturity Model. Next slide, please. So here's on the left, you see a number of relevant publications that might be of interest. So the actual specifications and guidelines as an RDA recommendation. EOSC released an intermediate report on a technical framework for FAIR principles implementation, and in that they referenced the model and how they had implemented it. So that may be an interesting read. And finally, the paper in the Data Science Journal. So those are things that have already appeared. The roadmap for the remainder of 2020 is a report on that survey and what's come out of that, establishing a work plan for 2021. And we will also be having a session around coordination around FAIR assessments at the CoData FAIR Symposium, FAIR Convergence Symposium. So if you're interested, please sign up for that. That is free to join. So there's no costs involved. So I would like to hand over now to, I think it is Max, will you be speaking on the survey on FAIR assessments?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith, for the overview. I keep an eye on the chat to see if there are any questions. So people, if you have some questions or some concerns or comments, please put them in the chat. Then we can actually take them into account when we get to the discussion session. Well, hello everybody, wherever you are, in which time zone you are. I'm Max Dekkers. I'm in the editorial team for this work, having been involved in the writing up of the maturity model that was published just in June earlier this year, and we're now working in the working group sort of after that publication to see what activities the working group will be doing over the next period, next year. One of the things that we did when we were talking with the working group about the FAIR maturity model, we had the feeling, and I think that everybody would agree, there's a little bit of a difference of perspective between funders and research community. So one of the things that we wanted to do in the end part of 2020 was to do a survey on the FAIR assessment, where we try to see if and how we can bridge the gap between those two perspectives. So we started the survey with two objectives. First of all is on the level of the policy, to see how the policies might need to be aligned to take into account the perspective of those two communities. And then the second objective was more practical regarding the fair data maturity model of what funders and communities see as the priorities or main aspects of the work of the working group in the next years. We did an e-survey on a voluntary basis with an 8-point questionnaire, and we had people come in to answer them. We then, the editorial team, take care of and making this anonymous to compile the results and then to come up with recommendations for further actions in the working group. In the next slide, we see sort of the first set of opinions that we gathered from the responses. So I have to say, it's not a large-scale survey. It's not hundreds of people, so we're only in the tens of responses. So it's not really representative, but we're trying to find, let's say, ideas coming from the more active people in our working group from those stakeholder communities and see what they think that is important. So on the policy and adoption side, we have the funders. We've seen opinions that funders think it's important that they set the requirements for assessment because they will be the people who pay for the research and that also need assessment for that. The funders seem to see a strong role for the professional societies and the infrastructure providers to drive the adoption of assessment methodologies, because there is a part of where communities have a view of what they want to do with their data in terms of reusing and sharing. And infrastructure providers will probably be able to provide the tools to do that. Then the funders also put the finger on the need for cross-discipline interoperability, whereas in communities, people might want to look more at how things are happening within their community. The funders really see a role and the benefit of having cross-discipline interoperability. But they also see that there probably need to be community-specific approaches and trying to match those to make sure that data can be reused widely. On the other hand, from the communities were hoping that there would be funding for the funding of global standards and approaches. So there is at least a global view of where things need to go, what kind of things people want to do. But they also think there is a real good place for funding for regional implementations, and there's already happening in various areas. Where I am in Europe, there is the European Open Science Cloud that takes a role there. So that's from the community's perspective, they really see the value of that. And also they see the value of sharing best practices and developing community practices, and competence centers is something that's been mentioned. So that's a little bit of a different perspective between the two, but they agree that there is a need for a neutral platform to bring stakeholders together. And RDA is mentioned by many of our respondents as the place where this can happen. And this is something that then also the working group that we're now talking about has a clear role in. On the other part of the survey, where we were looking at the future work and the future of the model, then funders have the idea that it would be useful to set the bar for fair enough, because currently there is no real idea of how far you want to go. Everybody wants to improve, but also there needs to be sort of a balance between the investment and the return that you have. So that's the bar for fair enough that funders would be looking for. Also, they think it would be necessary to select the most relevant indicators from the model in specific contexts. So for them, it would then be easier or possible to actually assess the fairness of the data that they're funding. For communities, there were opinions that it would be really good for this group to gather experience and success stories, because one of the things that everybody knows is that, well, making data fair is something that you need to do work for. It costs money, it costs resources, and having success stories would encourage people to actually do that. So that's something that they see as useful for the way that this work can progress. And also, one of the things that we haven't done in this working group currently, but some people think it's very important to pay attention to the choices that people make before they start producing data, so that you don't end up in the situation that you're assessing data at the end and say that it's not fair, but that could have been avoided if you made the right choices in the beginning, so the data automatically becomes fair from the research project. Both funders and the communities that we have received responses from think it's important that the scoring that is part of the model needs to be seen in the context of the community targets and practices. It doesn't make sense to try and make people do things and get them a score for things that really don't matter for them. So in a way, you need to look at what a community wants to achieve and what their practices are to be able to see how you can use the scoring to advance on the journey, as people say, towards fairness. Also, I think by definition, what we have done in the past year stays on a fairly general level, and everybody agrees that there needs to be more practical approaches. So making sure that researchers and stewards know exactly what to do, rather than having sort of a more general text that is currently in the model. And part of that is then to create actionable guidelines for particular situations. So that is something that the funders and the communities agree on, and that is also something that we're going to include into the work plan for the working group for next year. So this is sort of a first view of what we have learned so far. We are working on formulating further conclusions and recommendations, and the report of the survey will be available in a couple of weeks' time, but at least certainly before the end of the year. Okay, I see one question from Françoise.
Yes, maybe I can explain.
Yeah,
I wrote my question, but I remember that we discussed this already, and there is a mention of it in the recommendation, the fact that there is a need for a very wide assessment of the model itself, because it will be implemented in many different contexts, and there is, I really think that there is a need to gather not only the success stories, but also the difficulties, and to be ready to update the model, not every day, but to continually assess it and to gather the needs for updates.
Yes, François, you're absolutely right. And sorry, on the slide, I had to sort of condense the conclusions, but that is part of the gather experience of how it works. But it's also part of the line where it says to make the assessment approach more practical, based on the experience, to make sure that when you have the experience and see that something could be improved, that would feed into the more practical approaches and the actionable guidelines. So it's there. It's not in the text that you're referring to, but that's certainly something that came out of the survey so far.
Yes, and if I can just say an additional word about it, you know that there has been some debate about the priorities, still more than about the criteria themselves. And I really think that this gathering the experience on implementation about priorities is absolutely useful.
Yes.
Cookbook is not a bad idea, Chroma. I agree.
The cookbook, yeah. So that would be what I call the actionable guidelines, but the cookbook is certainly something that we have on our list. Okay, that's for me. Hand over back
Max,
to
there are
Pete.
two more Max, if I may say, there are two more comments. One from Bob Hanisch, agreeing with Francoise. He also worried that we are overly quantitative about fairness. And there is another one from Roman, that the cookbook would be useful. Yeah, kind of cookbook for community. And just reading the text.
Yeah,
And
thank
Pete.
you, Edith. Yeah, I'll just jump in. This is my usual caveat when I've attended these meetings, is that you know, people who are still struggling with making data open, with data sharing, can very well see, you know, the FAIR principles as becoming overly prescriptive. And, you know, we have to be very careful here. I mean, it's a good thing to push guidelines and a good thing to push good practices, and even a good thing to push some sense of maturity. But we have to be very careful not to disenfranchise the very people who are trying to encourage to be open and sharing of their data, for fear that they say, oh, I'm going to get a grade. I'm going to get a bad grade. And people that I work with at NIST and people that I work with more broadly in the research community, as soon as you start telling them, well, you're not getting anything but an A, they're going to start to retreat if we're not very careful about how we bring this forward. So, I mean, I'm all for this discussion, but again and again, I've always expressed a certain caution that we don't want this to have the adverse effect of actually pushing people underground rather than encouraging to be open. So it's a very tenuous line we have to walk here.
Can I come back to that? I think we have had the discussion, I think, over the last 18 months a couple of times. Well, what we try to do in the maturity model is see the scoring or the leveling in terms of giving people handles to improve rather than to turn them down. Let's say there is the tension between the funders, of course, who seek to have something in hand that they can use to evaluate the data. So that's something that is on that side. But I think everybody agrees, even the funders agree, that it's not really the objective to turn people down. The objective is to level people up.
Sure,
how
sure.
you do that
Yeah.
is a question that we still need to discuss. The model as it is now has sort of two aspects. Has a scoring approach for particular that some people might want, but there's also a leveling approach. So for each of the indicators, there are sort of levels of maturity. An indicator, you don't do any of that, or you start doing it, or you have a plan to do it, or you actually do it. So in that sense, an evaluation can give you, should give you handles to know where you can improve. And that's the scoring on this slide is sort of a shorthand for any way that you can express the assessment in some way, in a number or in a level. And we all agree that we need to be careful. Even the funders say that they need to be careful to just use the bare number to say, but the bare number doesn't say anything. You need to look at the details to make sure that the researchers know how to improve.
Max,
Yeah, Tony,
yes.
you certainly want to incentivize researchers toward being more fair.
Yeah.
But again, we just have to be very careful about the language that we use so that we don't have people think that, well, I'm going to publish a paper, I'm going to put my data out there, but somebody's going to come back and say, oh, you get a B minus, or you get a, you know, a 67 out of 100 or something because you didn't do something quite right. That's going to disincentivize people to share their data. So let's just be very conscious of that.
Max?
As forward.
Yes.
Max, I'd like to add here that we had a discussion in a Helsinki plenary, Bob, where actually we came with the survey that what of the criteria should be obligatory or mandatory, and which of them should be kind of voluntary or nice to have. And for our greatest surprise, actually the survey asked for more obligatory than actually we as a working group suggested originally. So the people definitely felt that some of the criteria are critically important for them. But I think that we took very cautious attention that and this is why we couldn't use some of the easy scoring and coloring like the traffic light system, because we didn't want to give the feeling that something is good or bad here. I think that what is important here is more the move that the scientists and the researchers can feel the dynamic move ahead. As well, for the funders, I think we spent quite enough time, especially in Europe, to explain that this is not a penalty system that you put the red bar somewhere and nobody can jump it through, or everybody can pass it, because none of them would help. More important is the progress itself. And this is why it's so important. I think that especially for those who were not in the previous session, that the tools can be used for the self-assessment and define your own path, define your own speed. How do you wish to do that? It can be valid for individual researcher, can be valid for a community. So it's more a kilometer zero that you can measure yourself. Where are you going from where you are? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Keith, you want to take the floor back to introduce the next one? Keith?
Keith, you are muted.
Yes, thanks, Christoph. You're yep. Okay, this is a really interesting discussion. I would like to see if we can revisit this at the end, and when we talk about the future of the working group and further work that we can do. But for now, I'd like to go to the two speakers that we had invited to speak about FAIR in their contexts, and to give a bit of a perspective about what is happening in different countries and in different contexts around FAIR, and what does FAIR mean in these relative contexts. So our first speaker is Chris Seal from the University of Auckland. And first of all, thank you very much for making your time available and being available here to speak. Chris has been working with a range of other people at the University of Auckland, including Yvette Wharton, who might be joining us later. And he's been, yes, kindly offered to present on what is happening at the University of Auckland and what does FAIR mean in that context. So I'd like to hand over to Chris now, and after that will be a chance to ask him questions. Chris.
Thank you. We have the next slide, please. Ko waitakere te maunga, ko wairoa te awa, no tomaki makaora ahau. Ko Chris toku unua. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to move to the next slide, please. Thank you all for your time today. I appreciate people are up late at night or very early in the morning. It's quite a civilized hour for us down here in New Zealand. I want to start by acknowledging both Yvette and Laura Armstrong, who can't be here at this point in time. They have done the bulk of this work, and they have a great deal more expertise than I do. But briefly today, I would like to talk about Aotearoa New Zealand, what our research sector is like, and where we see some of the FAIR, the care, and the Māori data sovereignty issues, with a particular focus on what's happening here at the University of Auckland. Next slide, please. So Aotearoa is a South Pacific island nation. We have a population of roughly 5 million people, and they identify as 17% Māori, 15% Asian, 8% Pacific, and 70% European. And as I'm sure most of you will have been aware, that sums to greater than 100%. which is because of the nature of our census, where people are able to identify with more than one ethnic group. Our research sector, looking at the public side of it, consists of 8 research universities and 7 Crown research institutions. And public funding comes primarily from 3 parties. So we have the Royal Society of New Zealand, who provide funding through the Marsden scheme, which is aimed at the fundamental science end of the spectrum. We have the Health Research Council, and we have our New Zealand Government Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, or MB. Put together, those 3 funders provide in the order of $2.5 billion New Zealand dollars of public funding a year. And that is split into small sort of individual scale research groups. But importantly, we have a number of large multidisciplinary, multi-institution centers of research excellence and national science challenges. And it's those that have driven some of the changes that we've seen. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Here in Aotearoa, we have a values and principles driven system rather than a legislative system. So from our funders and our ethics committees, we have codes of conduct relating to research integrity. And these documents require consideration of an integration, where possible, of the sort of values and principles that they espouse. Many of these are not specifically identified as fair/care, but terms like open data are commonly used. And the motivation from this can be seen from funders who are now looking to increase impact. So more and more commonly, we are seeing funders ask for data management plans. And these talk to, for example, how researchers will store, secure, and share the data that they generate. And there is a desire to share data as openly as possible, while recognizing that some data needs to be kept closed. We see this desire mirrored in both research organizations and by individual researchers. They are also now seeking more to increase the impact of their work. And as I mentioned previously, we've got these large cross-disciplinary, cross-institution research projects. And within those, there's a need to share data internally. In particular, where we have cross-disciplinary research, there's a need to speak the same language. And this in turn is leading more and more to fair principles of sort of interoperability and accessibility. I'd also say that we are now starting to see impact being more than just peer esteem. So there is a growing awareness of societal impact, and we're seeing researchers and research organizations recognize the need to partner with communities. And that's why we can see the laser kiwi here. If we move to the next slide, please. This plenary is quite timely for a couple of reasons. One of which is that we are in the process of seeing a new Privacy Act. So our Privacy Act is being updated, and this comes into force on the 1st of December. Key to this act really is the idea that privacy is precious, that it should be protected and respected. And there are these 13 principles that we've sort of highlighted on this graphic, which govern how personal information should be collected and handled. This sort of indicates or speaks to a risk being a driver for our institutions. They are wanting to adhere to these new privacy principles, particularly with respect to mandatory reporting of any privacy breaches. And as a result, they're looking to international best practice. which includes fair and care principles. One of the unique aspects of New Zealand is our Māori culture. And if I can step to the next slide, please. We have a group, Te Mana Raonga, who have been working with Māori data sovereignty. This is an area that I don't have a lot of expertise, so I have taken the liberty of taking some words directly from their webpage to speak on their behalf. So the webpage states, our data, our sovereignty, our future. This vision drove the establishment of Te Mana Raonga as the Māori Data Sovereignty Network. They advocate for Māori rights and interests in data to be as protected as the world moves into an increasingly open data environment. And I think this speaks to awareness of the need for fair data and how moving into the future, New Zealand is looking to adopt more of those fair data principles. As part of the work that Te Mana Raonga is doing, they have provided an audit tool that is available for our researchers to go and see how their data management fits within that space. We can move to the next slide. So I'm now going to talk a little bit more specifically about what we have been doing here in the University of Auckland and how we are enabling FAIR where possible. By we, this is a wider institution project, but a lot of the work that's being done is the work of the group that I am part of, which is the Centre for E-Research. So a lot of the stuff I will talk about will be specific to the Centre for E-Research. If we can move to the next slide. So Auckland is Tamaki Makaurau. It's a narrow isthmus of land between two harbours, and it's known locally as the City of Sails. It's home to 1.6 million people, and it is ethnically diverse. We're far enough away from the fault lines that we don't get very many earthquakes, so it doesn't shake as much as some of the other cities in New Zealand. But we are sitting on a monogenetic volcanic field, which has erupted at least 52 times in the past. If we can go to the next slide, please. Te Whare Wananga o Tamaki Makaurau, University of Auckland, is New Zealand's largest university. It was founded in 1883, and currently we have in the order of 40,000 students with about 5,500 full-time staff. If we can go to the next slide, please. Again, once again, this plenary sort of timing is quite fortuitous in that we are at the very beginning of a institution-wide project to understand what our current data maturity level is. This is something that is across all aspects of the university. And really, we're seeking to ask and answer the question, where is our research data maturity currently? And more importantly, what do we need to do by? Move to the next slide, please. So within the Centre for E-Research, one of the things that we work on is training. And a large part of the researcher training that we do is around data management. Appreciate this is a somewhat detailed slide, but this is the kind of information that we are seeking to convey to our researchers. We're trying to discuss the idea of the research life cycle and where data exists and how that data moves through that life cycle. We start with the idea of developing a concept from looking at existing data that's available. That leads into data management planning and doing the work. How do we ensure that we capture data appropriately, we mark it with metadata appropriately so that it is as reusable and as accessible as possible. And that flows through to outputs. What can we do in order to encourage the use of things like dataset DOIs so that data sets are available and researchers get credit not only for the research publication, but also for the data that's generated. If we can move to the next slide, please. So as part of running these courses and interacting with researchers, we realized that currently within the university, we have a lot of entangled data streams. And often we are going to speak to researchers, we're asking for the same information that they have already provided to us. So this leads to researcher frustration. You get the yet another form to fill in kind of feedback from them. And we think that this is an area that we can do better. So we've started taking some steps towards trying to untangle this mess. You can go to the next slide, please. So one of the ideas that we have adopted, and we are in the process of adopting.
Sorry, Chris. Just looking at the time, if you could work towards the end, in another few minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Yep, no problems. So we have the idea of a project as a waka or a canoe, and there are various items of information that are stored within that project. One of the first things we can do is use persistent identifiers. So we are now moving towards using RAIDs, research activity identifiers. We encourage people to use ORCIDs. We've been working with I4I Oz in developing instrument identifiers. We want to get all of this information with persistent identifiers so that if we can move to the next slide, what we would like to see is an interconnected ecosystem with a data management plan at the center and various aspects of research interacting with that data management plan. So the researcher provides information about the project, and then when they request services such as compute or storage, we can get that information from the project information they have already provided without having to go back to the researcher and ask them the same question. And this is kind of where we're aiming towards. And if I can just go to the last slide. So we see a vision of research moving forward together, where we have things like persistent identifiers contributing to a connected ecosystem. And we are guided by our principles of care and fair, intellectual property, and ethics. On that note, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. That was a great overview of all the work that's happening there, and it's very interesting to see where your institutional push is there to support the efforts of researchers in a range of different disciplines. So, are there any questions to Chris? Okay.
Maybe the most obvious one, that will he use the fair data maturity model? Did they try it, or are they going to try it?
It is part of the data maturity program that we've just started at. One of the aspects of that is looking at where we're at across all of our data maturity, and where our fair maturity is part of that assessment.
Françoise, you raised your hand?
Yes, is it only me or the chat is disabled?
Oh. That's strange.
The chat seems to be working.
Yes, it's only for me, so it's to make me shut up. I will get
No,
out and
well, you
come
can
back.
speak up. So.
It is the same for me. It's for me as well. So
Sorry, Francoise, do you have a question or not to Chris?
No, I was just wanting to tell that the chat may be open only to the organizers. I see that you are able to write, but I'm not sure we are able. And it's useful it's just because it's useful for the meeting.
Yes.
Bob was able to do that when just before he left. So
yes, but it was blocked after that.
Yeah,
so it's maybe only me, so I can go out and come back.
It's
no,
back.
no, it's the case for me, Françoise.
Yes. So
it just popped back up.
Can you try again, Françoise, after it with the parameters?
Yes, for me it's good.
Yeah, great.
Also for you, Françoise?
Yes, it works for me also. It was the parameters. And sorry for Chris, it was a great talk. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem, I understand entirely. Thank you.
Okay. Look, in that case, I'd like to move on to our next presentation to hear from a completely different side of the world and a different time zone. Shelley, would you like to do the introduction?
I'm happy to do that. Pedro Carrera is one of the PIs working on a grant that I'm also a PI on. And his team has been doing in University of Sao Paulo is just incredible. And I'm really delighted to have him speak with us today and share the breadth of work that's happening. And I'll let Professor Pedro take it away.
Thank you, Shelley, for this opportunity to talk about what's happening with fair development in Brazil. Our approach of this presentation will be to talking about some research actions that we are doing here in Brazil, and just as a proxy, what is happening in Brazil and maybe in South America, just to have an idea. So the University of São Paulo is USP, is responsible for 20% of all national scientific production in Brazil. And it's one of the most important universities in South America. You have students from all South America, from Peru, from Colombia. Most of them are from Peru, Colombia, Chile, and many countries. Students from different countries, they used to come to University of São Paulo. And our unit of University of São Paulo is School of Engineering. We call Escola Politécnica. And this Escola Politécnica has around 4,500 undergrad students and 1,500 grad students. This is very competitive institution here because we attracted many students from our country in engineering area especially, and from all South America mainly for grad programs. So I will talk a short description here about the project that you are working now in the University of São Paulo. I think I will talk more about the PARSEC project, not in this slide. I will talk in another slide. The another project that I'd like to talk is about the project that is running in Amazon. In Amazon, you are collecting aerosol to understand the climate change. There is a strong community, scientific community linked with geoscience in Brazil. They have 30 years of research related with Amazon, but we don't have we don't have a culture related with data management, related with FAIR here in Brazil. You don't have people working especially with this area. So the last 5 years, we start to create more community related with data management and support these people that work with collect data from Amazon. So this is a very important project that we started in 2015. And in this project, we are developing a model for aerosol data quality management report. This is very important because you are collecting data, you are local collecting data, you must have quality, data quality. So this is very important. And we are developing a data portal and big data analysis infrastructure based on cloud infrastructure. This is what you are doing. This is the way, the path that you are going you are using here in Brazil today, using more cloud and not local infrastructure. And this is the way that you are using here in Brazil. And another very interesting project that we did in Brazil is more related of domain repository. Is the one we have two strong areas in Brazil related with data management. One is related with biodiversity, that we have some around 10 years of experience, good experience with biodiversity data management. And another area is related with geoscience, that we start to work in this area. We focus on data management, we focus on FAIR in the last of 5 years, I think. So this is one good project that we have partnership with Atlas of Living Australia, and we deploy a portal, the data portal for biodiversity in 2015. This is very good, very interesting project that we gain some maturity related with data management. This is very important. We don't need to, you must to have a local data management local data management local in Brazil, because we must develop this area for support FAIR. This is very important. And for us in Brazil right now, we have very, especially in our group, we have this PARSEC project. PARSEC project is has a partnership with RDA here. And this PARSEC is the subject is to building new tools for data sharing and reuse through a transnational investigation of the socioeconomic impacts of protected areas. This project has a very interesting characteristic because we work with data science group, very strong data science group with leadership of Shirley Stahl and Alison Speech from Australia, and the synthesis science group with the leadership of David Molleux from CISAB from France. This is very interesting because we work together, data science strand, give you recommendation for science strand, synthesis strand group. So this is very, very interesting way to work. And one important area of this project is dissemination. It's good because you must disseminate the best practices. We must disseminate what you have done in this project. Especially is very special for Brazil because this is what you are going next activity here in Brazil. In 2021, we are planning a workshop in data science This is the goal of this workshop. Will be in São Paulo, and the idea is to present the advances of PARSEC project on leading practice for data sharing, attribution, credit, reuse, and citizens synthesis as a tool and toolkit for Brazilian, especially for Brazil. This is very important for Brazil, and international community interested in open data and management and analysis. And we hope to have some of you guys in this conference here in Brazil in the first week of September in São Paulo, Brazil. And one important thing that I'd like to talk about the recommendations is be transparent in methods, platform, and the infrastructure. This is very important because you must, when you have this, people will be trustable to use some platform. For us in Brazil, it's important to have like a mentoring of some more maturity institutions like USGS, like Oak Ridge National Laboratory, like NCI, related with experience to exchange experience. This is very, very important for us. And a strong, this is, we must do, we don't have now in Brazil, strong participation with international forums like RDA, Codata, and some communities like ZIP and AGU. This is very important for us, and we are to improve this in Brazil. One thing that we can use the same infrastructure that the last generation of data management did. So we must consider, for example, use cloud and containers. This is another infrastructure that we must to consider in our project. Another consideration is consider to use some business model that are for support our projects, for support the sustainability of some projects. Like for example, we'll have some international oil company interested on the balance of carbon in Brazil. They can support, for example, part of the project data management in the Amazon. This is what we are doing. We are trying to do here in Brazil. One important thing, people. People is the most important thing, and we must to develop people. We must develop master, PhD student. We must train people in data management, and it's very important some collaboration between university for exchange people, for exchange. This is very, very important. We believe in this. And just to understand better what you are doing and what is the way what is the path that we must to follow in Brazil and in the other countries, is important to understand, use the maturity model, for example, where we are. Because when you understand better where you are, you can find a best way. So this is, I love this graph that you can understand. For example, if you have this situation, that you have short-term storage for give some actions in society. And for example, if you just have storage private of the researcher, for active curated that we must achieve someday, maybe. So I think we must understand where we are to understand better what we must do. So thank you for this opportunity, and I hope we can be more involved with RDA and all initiatives related with FAIR and the actions related with data and maturity FAIR model. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. That was really fantastic. One of the comments that she made about focusing on the last 5 years to bring data management to your community. Can you describe a little bit more? How do you see that? I think the story of that being valuable to funders and to our students and to other researchers, I think those stories are really critical. And if you can share how you see that being valuable, I think it would be interesting for everyone to hear that.
Yeah, I will detail some ideas about the geoscience community here in Brazil. And they worked in Amazon collected data for the last 30 years. And there are a strong community, very focused with climate. And most of them, they do not share your data. And the last 5 years, when they share, they are related with some projects with, for example, with US government, for example, for collect data, collect aerosol in Amazon, Go Amazon, for example, related to the Department of Energy of US. So this is the opportunity that they have, some opportunity to practice a real data management, real fair. This is the opportunity that they have. But the problem is they are in local, they are collecting data there, but they don't understand why they, for example, they adopt some fair. They just do because they must follow some recommendation of Department of Energy. But they don't understand because they don't have culture of data management. And not just culture, but this is understand better, we don't research data management. So this is important to bring this in Brazil, because you are trying to do this in the last 5 years. We are trying to change this scenario to incorporate it more data management, incorporated with FAIR, when you have some local people here develop and research in data management. This is very important. Develop infrastructure, you know, this is very important. I think so. Thank you. Thank you, Sheila.
It's really interesting the way you say that, and I want to really pull in. I'm sorry, Bob's not on this call any longer, but I want to really pull in his comment about being cautious on how a fair assessment would be implemented, because what you just said is, because an entity like the Department of Energy required a certain type of data sharing, we actually have access to data in the Amazon that we wouldn't have otherwise. And I think if we can help make these connections, and Bob is right, we do need to be cautious, because we don't want to send the message that there's wrongdoing or something inappropriate by not having your data fully fair. There's definitely caution in that message. But if we can use this for the good to encourage in our institutions to implement these requirements, the sticks that are required to make a culture change. And then the value, what I really hope the next time we talk to you on this subject is, oh, those same researchers now see it valuable because there is a body of knowledge that's been curated, and new discoveries can take place that weren't possible before. And let's see, do we have any questions? Edith mentioned funding about the research, the RAID process. Is that what that is? RAI? I thought it was RAID.
Sorry for the typo. It was the fair. Yeah, I think that it's a very important message that beside requesting the fair, we have to consider that it's an investment to make the fair process. Yeah, so actually, I find it a very valuable message for the funders too, that you are not only requiring the fairness, but you recognize that it's not free. Yeah, the researchers have to do it, and it has to be financed. Otherwise, nobody will be able to deliver on this.
Yes. John, you're from USGS, right? Delicately.
No, Stanford.
Stanford. I'm sorry, John. It was an S.
Close enough, yeah.
Yes, delicately. And that's really good advice coming to the maintenance group on starting to move forward with how we would actually position that. Professor Pedro, I want to argue with you a little bit. Although you say that you only recently started thinking about FAIR, I would argue with you that it may not be the acronym, but you and your team have been working very hard on using persistent identifiers and having quality control on your data. Yes, the acronym may not have been foremost, but your practices around data have been excellent, and I've really shown that through your work with on the team. So I really want to give you kudos for that.
Yes. So the FAIR we are considering FAIR in general, but we must do mapping what you must to do in considering the infrastructure, considering the data policy, because most of the institutions here in Brazil, they are starting to create some local infrastructure for scientific data management. They started last two or 3 years. Most of universities, most are related with universities. Some of them is related with scientific supporters like FAPESP. They start to create a repository, but they don't create policy for encourage people for award people that publish your data. This is one thing that we must to consider when in Brazil, and because you don't have policy if you don't have infrastructure. So you must have infrastructure. We are start to do this. We started to do this in Brazil, but we need more policies to support and encourage people and award researchers that publish your data. And one important thing, another important thing is consider in grad programs. All grad programs has some scientific methodology, and consider in scientific methodology the use of the FAIR principles. And we are considering this in our grad programs, work with FAIR as a part of methodology in general, scientific methodology. FAIR is part of this. So we are working in this approach in grad programs. This is very important to have some specific disciplines and give some directions, give some contents in grad programs to give some directions about the FAIR. I think should be very interesting, should be very important, this kind of approach for educated, the new generation of science.
Yep, I would agree. I think all of our institutions worldwide need to continue on that. Keith has a really good question about if there is a tension or challenge between disciplinary policies, earth and space sciences, for instance, versus institutional policies at that higher level. Are you seeing anything there?
Here in Brazil, is most of the actions is driven by international pressures, and some of them is from the national community in science. really, this is we must work together because this is the way that we can convince how implement the institution, because this is we must have some budget for this.
Okay.
And this is one approach.
Okay.
Another approach is have some supporters from companies that they are interested. They are interested on the science, the synthesis. They are interested in this, and they can support the infrastructure for science. So you're trying to do both here in Brazil.
I think that's very exciting. Max, I don't have a stopwatch. How close are we on time?
We're on time. We're still on time. We still have a couple of minutes for the discussion.
Great, great. There are other comments for Professor Pedro. I don't know if anybody else would like to jump in for questions for Chris as well. Edith mentions that the FAIR data maturity model can be used self-improvement and increase awareness. So I realize that it's probably a little new for you, Professor Pedro, but that would be an opportunity to bring to your team. And I'm sure we can get you a presentation.
Shelley, I may have a question to Professor Pedro. I think that the RDA very much wish to go to Brazil, to other universities and other places as well in other countries in the Latin America. And I'd like to ask the professor that how we can better disseminate the RDA results, FAIR data maturity, but maybe other outputs as well over Brazil. Can you tell us something about how much the different universities and the different research institutes work together or are interested to each other work? So the dissemination in the country of the FAIR.
Yeah, I totally agree. FAPESP is very interested in this. I think so. FAPESP is our state agency that support research in Brazil. I think FAPESP would be very interested in this. In Brazil, especially, strong with institutions that are strong in research, like USP, like University of São Paulo. Another institution that is strong in research is Unicamp, University of Campinas. This is very strong in research. They are interested on data science, interested on data management, interested on FAIR. I think they would be very good audience in this for this subject. And I think some institutions more related with government, they start to look this subject, like the Ministry of Environment, for example. They are interested in this because we have support the biodiversity data here in Brazil, and they are looking for a governance model for biodiversity data, and they must understand where we are, where are we? So we must have a maturity model. It's very good for this. I think Colombia has a very strong community related with biodiversity, and maybe should be interested in this area in Colombia. I don't remember the name of them. I can tell you after, but Colombia is a very strong community in like in Costa Rica has in biodiversity, and Colombia has too.
We can connect the two of you for a discussion for sure. I thank you very much, Professor Pedro. This was really fantastic. I appreciate the time you took to spend with us. And Professor Pedro is also the new co-chair for the Earth, Space, and Environmental Science Interest Group. So he is making a larger footprint with RDA, which we are very delighted to have. Christoph, would you like to take us to the next slide?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's going to be me. So what I'm going to give you a quick word about the topics identified for the revision of the model, which are going to be covered in the maintenance phase for the years to come. But Shelley is going to talk about that in the next slide. So in the context of maintenance of the maturity model, some topics to be addressed have been identified. If we look back at the history of the working group, some issues have arisen during the development of the fair data maturity model, and it generated some debates, and the views on how to solution these debates were often differing. So what we tried to do is to narrow down the issues to specific topics, which are displayed on the screen. And in our last meeting, we proposed this topic to a vote, while having in mind that they have to be addressed at some point in time. So if we look at the podium of the results we have with in the first place, the metadata practices. So it relates to the fact that there is a need of development to improve domain specific metadata in generic platforms, but also the fact that metadata may be provided on several levels. So at the collection level, so a group of data resources, or at the individual level, so at the dataset level. We also noted the need for better definitions of the terms used in the FAIR principles. So it's about rich metadata and as well as knowledge representation. Second on the podium is data granularity. So it was observed that data comes in different granularities. So it could be a whole data set or part of a data set, or even individual items. So it poses a challenge to evaluate fairness. And on the third place, we have two topics. So the first one is taking into account the community aspects for the fair assessment tools and services. It relates to the point made earlier in this call by Françoise and Robert, if I'm not mistaken. And last one on the podium is the PID practices across communities. So we noted in the working group that both metadata and data should be identified with a persistent identifier, but however, in some situations, it was acknowledged that separate PIDs might need to be assigned, especially to a landing page, and then the landing page points to the data set. So these are the topics identified for the next version of the model, and they will be further discussed in the year to come. Shelley, over to you.
Actually, it's me.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, Christoph. So just as a closure, I will talk about what is the plan for the future, because the working group published the recommendation and the guidelines in July, and now we talked that we prepare to start the maintenance working group for the next 2 years to make sure that we are able to follow the topics, and we are able to collect the feedback from the many different RDA working groups who are working with FAIR, and from the very different communities who are using the FAIR data maturity model in their daily work. So we wish to collect the positive experiences and also the challenges which people had difficulties with in the daily practice. I think that somebody made it in the comments also, that it's important to collect also the challenges, not only the good stories. We are absolutely aware of that. So we wish to address, we wish to be open and listen, yeah, kind of elephant mode with the big ears to listen what's going on in the marketplace. We very much need, of course, the help of the communities. So unless we get the feedback, we are not able to collect the information from you otherwise. Then we wish to discuss in the next coming months that what is the best way to address the governance and the maintenance of the practical aspects. What we are very, very sorry about that probably in the next half year we will not have with us the wonderful editorial team, but we do hope that they are coming back soon when we are going to the next potential phase, and one of the founder will help us with the editorial team, because I think it was crucially important, and very, very big thanks for the editorial team, both Max and Chris. I think that they made a wonderful job. But we wish to use the first part of the year anyway to collect and to prepare what to do. What we are absolutely sure that the maintenance has to be a kind of continuous, because the dissemination of the fair data maturity model is continuous as well. But on the other side, the revision, it cannot be a continuous change, because then nobody would be able to follow. So what we talked and we suggest in the working group, that probably after collect and evaluate all the information back from the market and have the process of the dissemination, we wish to make a first revision of the model in 2020-22. And if necessary, then to change. If not necessary, then don't change, because the change itself is not a target. The change for better is the target. And probably we suggest to review the model in every 2 years in the beginning, and maybe then leave it or make a bigger spaces afterwards. Max mentioned in the beginning that, or no, it was actually Keith, that the fair maturity, the fair principles themselves are probably need to revisit as well. This is not part of our working group necessarily, but probably we will add arguments to it, and we have to define the process maybe together, that how the fair maturity fair principles can be clarified or better formulated in the future. So the first 6 months we wish to use for collecting information, and it's very much up to you, the participants here. And please give the message to everyone you know that who is working with FAIR, that the feedback is critical to make the next steps together. And I think that we organize some meetings between, but it will be explained by Chris in the next slide. Thank you.
And thanks, Edith, but I think it's going to be Shelley.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, covering the last 3 slides.
Thank you. It's great having an awesome team to work with. So reporting out on the survey is coming up next. This is just next steps, and we're into our last couple minutes. We do have a webinar planned next week, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then the Code-Data Convergence symposium that's coming up in December. And Keith already mentioned that that's a free registration. So please do register for that, and we hope to see you there. Let's see, did I miss anything? Okay, great, that's perfect. So you're all welcome to come to the webinar next week, and we are turning our focus on the US funders and getting them engaged in the discussion on what it means to think about implementing FAIR and introducing some of them to the FAIR data maturity model. You see that the folks from the European Open Science Cloud are going to provide an update on their experience with the FAIR data maturity model. And the European Commission, who has been very active in our work, both Carlos and Costas are going to be providing an update on how they see the model. And then we're also reaching out to USGS, NIH, and NSF to have them talk about what they're doing with FAIR. And I'm really excited for them to be engaged in the subject and connect better with the RDA community in a different way. Some of NSF is funding RDA, so they're well connected, but connecting in a different way, trying to help them, show them a path to implement potential recommendations. Yeah, I'm excited about the USGS presentation. This is a project that I'm supporting myself, their FAIR roadmap, and I'm really looking forward to them presenting it. It'll be their first time presenting it outside the USGS walls. That will be very exciting. And then NIH has a brand new data science strategy sharing plan that they've just announced a few days ago, and it'll be very exciting to have Susan Gregorick share that. Still working on NSF. If anybody on the call can help me with that, that would be great. But they've got a lot of conflicts next week, and I haven't quite gotten our person yet. Next slide. And then we also have a joint session on Thursday that I hope you'll be able to come to. And it really ties in. And Chris, I hope you can make it to this one, because this will really be in your swim lane on connecting care and FAIR, and the work that we've done with the FAIR principles, and that in the International Indigenous Data Sovereignty, IG, there's just huge effort happening there, and we're really delighted to be able to support them in any way. Next slide. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, guys, I'd like to come back, Edith, because I forgot to say something very important, which we discussed yesterday on the prep meeting, and now Francois also mentioned in the comment, that the RDA FAIR data maturity model is a building block, and therefore it goes to other projects. And we are very happy that the metrics became a very important part of the global open research commons work. So we will supply the FAIR data maturity model as one of the major metrics to this work. And the GORC is one of the working group which was created in Helsinki. And we are very proud that they will use our FAIR data maturity model. So I just want to say that it is not only good its own, but it is a building block to other bigger projects within RDA as well. Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Francois, to remind me.
Fantastic.
Okay, so can I maybe just with the slide that you're seeing here, just invite people to keep track of what we're doing. We have a mailing list that people who are a member of the working group get announcements when they are there, and our work takes place on GitHub. So whenever there is a discussion item, we ask people to go to GitHub and provide feedback to issues or create new issues, because that's the collaborative work that we're going to do also in the next period. So please look at the references that are in here on the screen, and then we hope you become and remain involved in the work in the future. With that, I think, Keith, you want to say the last word?
Shelley, I think there's the question from Jessica Salas about a link or reference to the upcoming webinar, and I'm guessing that's the RDA webinar on, that's that discussion webinar next week around FAIR in the US and the role of various organizations there. Shelley, do you have a link to that you could put in the chat?
I'll put that in, Jessica.
Okay, great. And the slides will be available, including the links that are in the slides. So again, thank you all. Thank you for attending, and thank you for providing your thoughts. And hope to see you in some of the other sessions that are related to this in the rest of this in the rest of this plenary. So, for example, data granularity sounds like a really interesting session, but also the FAIR and CARE and the other related sessions. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you in either the webinar next week or the FAIR implement. Oh, I keep forgetting it. The FAIR Convergence Symposium workshop will be organizing. So, thank you all.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Stay fair.
Christoph, can you see how you save the chat?
It's already saved, Max.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much, and good night to people in Europe. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Good night to you too. Bye.